Next one is impact on business from Council Works. I can't remember, Raph, whether you were chairing that meeting or whether Andrew was. Andrew, can you present the report?
Yep, I'm certainly happy to introduce this item. So there was some good discussion at the committee and there was a variety of views expressed. The committee was quite rightfully concerned about the effects of roadworks on businesses, and it became quite clear as the discussion progressed that a significant amount of work has already been done, and that there's a clear commitment from staff to continue to engage with businesses and to improve engagement not only during construction projects but also prior to construction works taking place, including matters like alternative pedestrian access, car parking considerations and so on. The committee by majority did agree with the staff recommendation, but the committee recommendation is in fact more explicit than the recommendation we had from staff regarding requirements for liaison and engagement by staff and by contractors as part of the procurement process. So that's reflected in paragraphs 3A to 3C in the recommendation, and requests a report back, a regular report back in conjunction with the capital watch list, which is expressed at item 4 in the recommendation. So whilst there was a desire at the committee on the part of some to go further than this, it became quite clear that any way that we could or would do that may turn out to be quite unworkable. What we have tried to do is to work with the staff recommendation, but I think to strengthen that to the greatest extent possible so that we can have a good level of confidence that where businesses are affected by roadworks, we and the contractors do everything that we possibly can to make sure that those effects are mitigated and that we work with the businesses, including work before the roadworks take place and picked up in procurement processes to ensure that that happens as well.
All right, so you're happy to move it?
Yep.
And I'll second it, so it's on the, I've just got to move it and second it, but are there questions first? Dion, did you have a question or no? Yanni?
There was something in the media the other day about contracts being signed where contractors don't have to work under a certain temperature, and I just wondered whether we'd considered any sort of requirements when we give the licences to occupy or do roadworks on our roads around the reasonableness or unreasonableness of certain conditions that tend to lead to huge delays, as we're seeing in the accessible city.
The reference to temperature is probably related to sealing work. You can only seal down to a certain temperature, and then the work that you undertake will not be effective because of the level of the cold level. Basically, the bitumen will go off too quickly. In terms of the three processes we have formally in place for temporary traffic management, licence to occupy the road reserve, and the corridor access requests, which are when people dig holes in the road, we're limited in terms of the conditions we put on those, but obviously when we review them, we do review the impact on adjacent property and can put conditions on whoever holds that permit to abide by, but that wouldn't extend as far as the conditions we would put in their they may put in their contracts for a company like Kinetics, etc. That's a contractual arrangement between them and whoever's doing the work for them, but they would be expected to comply with any conditions that are on whichever consent they get.
Do we look at the time of year in which they propose to do the work and whether it's reasonable to do it, e.g. a construction program over the middle of winter when temperatures mean that it's a lot less likely that you can do the work in the time?
Again, we are limited by the corridor access legislation. In terms of service providers, we are basically just custodians of the road corridor in that environment, and we are required by that legislation not to impede unreasonably the service providers using our road reserve.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? David?
Look, I realise we sort of live under an increasingly health and safety oriented environment, but I'm just interested with a lot of our roadworks. There's been a tendency for contractors to put out their equipment and their roads, cones and everything, and then they might sit there for days before they start. And the other thing is we will have half a kilometre of cones for a very small bit of work. How are we managing that sort of process at the moment, the overkill of road cones in relation to the size of the project and the practice at times of setting things up and then not doing anything for days?
Certainly CTOC are increasingly working with the applicants to utilise proactive traffic management, which really is exactly what you described, rather than just setting out the worst case scenario and then leaving it there for 6 weeks, being proactive about reducing it when it's not necessary at such times as weekends. And recently we've had complaints because of signs being left on the side of the road and face down and so on. That was a result of that proactive management, that contractor went in and just turned all the signs round at the weekend. I guess it wasn't fully understood the reasoning behind it, but certainly CTOC are more working with contractors about putting that extra effort into changing the arrangements when it's not necessary to protect their workers. But we do have to be mindful that there are hazards to motorists on the site. Even though the workers might not be there, there are still open trenches and so on, so we can't so there's the two aspects to the health and safety side. There's the safety of the workers and the safety of the road users they have to bear in mind.
Now, hopefully we can get over the overkill at times. You might have several hundred metres of cones for a small road repair in the middle of a bit frustrating at times.
Again, the contractors have their own health and safety plans. We try and work with them, but it's their responsibility, and so frequently the Handbook of Temporary Traffic Management is seen as a code of good practice throughout the country. So a lot of contractors are reticent to go below those recommendations because it might expose them to risk should there be an event of some form.
All right, I'll open it up for debate. Andrew, do you want to lead off?
I was certainly very comfortable with the committee's recommendation on this. I think it's a pragmatic approach to something that we know has been a big problem. I also think it's important that we look at this in different contexts as well. We've heard a lot recently around the way that roadworks have impacted in the central city, but of course suburban projects are also significant when it comes to the effect of roadworks on small businesses. I'm comfortable that we can pick this up through the procurement processes. I'm comfortable that we can work proactively with businesses. The solution for one business might be quite different to the solution for another in terms of alternative parking or what accesses are needed. There may be things that we can work in around times of day. There may be businesses which are busier in the evenings, and there's something that we can do while the roadworks are actually not taking place. So this certainly allowed us to have a very good discussion about something which has been a high-profile issue at the committee. And I think we've got to a reasonably pragmatic solution, and I'll certainly be looking forward to getting those report backs that are referred to in item 4 so that we can continue to monitor the way that this is working.
Dion?
Actually, I'm just going to want to, before I start, echo something that Councillor Rest was just saying, that on St Asaph Street over the last weekend there was a small work site on the footpath, and they closed off the entire road and made it one way because there was a small hole on the footpath.
There's a one-way street.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
Just
it's a two-way part of the street. It's close to where I live, so I actually had to go. It was actually really annoying because they closed off the entire street, made one small spot just to do a footpath little hole, and it was covered over by a piece of metal and left like that the whole weekend. These things are actually happening in our city, and it actually is absolutely disgraceful that disruption that this stuff causes for people, when it actually, common sense makes it just seem unreasonable, and that's where unreasonable maybe needs a better definition. This is a compromise from my point of view, which is good for us to start thinking about how we deal with roadworks and the works on our street. I still would like to go further, so that from my point of view this won't be the end. I'm still going to research some of these like rental systems that they're using around the other parts of the world to actually say, what is a road corridor or a public use corridor? Do you pay a rental that's then put into the tender processes and you know, just a money go round, but it incentivises people to get these things done fast and decentivises them to do them slowly. So it's not the end for me, but there's more work to do for me behind the scenes and whatnot. But this doesn't necessarily also, this doesn't also take into consideration the other people, the other parties who are doing work on our roads at the moment. And the two big ones in Christchurch that have caused probably the most disruption, and it's probably going to create a recovery on top of a recovery, is Durham Street and Manchester Street. They are revolting. And I'm surprised that there hasn't been a revolt. I'm surprised there hasn't been a revolt on the time it's taken to do those two roads. Like driving down Manchester Street, I look at the plan, I've got plans. I mean, I'm in a privileged position, I can look at the plan and try and work it out, but for every, many people, you drive down there, you just have no idea what's going on, and it's taken so long. It's been a year and a half that that damn road's been closed, to two-way traffic. This doesn't go as far to address that issue, and that's where I think the sort of, if we looked at a rental system in the future that would actually address those kind of that problem. But that organisation needs to go on notice to get that work done, because it is starting to upset our city. The Hereford Street car park that we will talk about later has 52 people on the weekend going and using it because people can't get to it. It's just not on. And that's what they've been saying, the people who own the Hereford Street car park, because of all the roadworks and stuff around there, they just don't know how to get to these places. And for having it there for a year and a half is just not on, and it can't happen in our city ever again. But so this goes a wee way to starting doing that from our own perspective. So it's good to sort of get our own camp in a good place, but we need to take responsibility for the other users that are using the roadways and actually doing this disruption. But I'll support this.
Thank you. Yanni?
Yeah, I agree with the comments that have been made. I think we really do need to look at how we can improve. And I know, that maybe it's a communication thing, because, there's another article about Riccarton Road, and people just don't get a sense of contractors working when maybe there's reasons because of the weather, or the resources have been diverted to Kokura, or whatever it is. There is a frustration, like Councillor East and Councillor Swiggs have raised, is that people see a whole bunch of stuff blocked off and then very little activity, and it's been something that, I think if we can improve it through the communication about why things aren't happening if they're not, or if things aren't happening and we're monitoring it more to make sure that more things do happen, then that will be hopefully a better outcome. I too can continue. I'll work with Councillor Swiggs over too, because I do think we at some stage need to consider where businesses are being unreasonably affected by delays to roadworks, that there should be some mechanism for, in cases of hardship, that they can actually apply for some relief. And certainly some of the stories that I've seen post-earthquake, it wasn't the earthquake that did the damage, but it was the roadworks that put some businesses to huge financial pressure because of the length of time taken just to do what appeared to be pretty straightforward and simple things. So, but I think it's a good start, and I'll support it.
Jamie and Raph.
Cheers, I'll be quick with this, but I just wanted to say that, very seldom does chucking money blindly at something ever solve it, and I think that the recommendations in 3 are really what is going to make the difference, and it's about communication and collaboration, and they're not just buzzwords, but they're answers to a genuine question. And whilst we share these frustrations, the answer is not robbing Peter to pay Peter, because these businesses are ratepayers. So whilst taking money, from the same person and giving it to them again, I think is a nonsense. I think the other issue around this is definition. And if we wanted to go down a track of, like I said, the robbing Peter to pay Peter road, then you'd essentially be trying to define what is affected by the earthquake. Is there anyone that hasn't been affected by the earthquake? And I would argue that there wouldn't be a person in Christchurch that hasn't been adversely impacted as a result of the quakes. So I think there is an answer to this, and it's about doing things smarter and doing things in partnership with the community. But I think we've got a pragmatic set of recommendations there, and I think it's a better way to go, because the blindly chucking money at things is just would be a very dangerous precedent, and I don't think it would solve anything.
Raph?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the key here, and the feedback I've had from businesses, especially around Durham Street, is communication. So we can't rely on just popping information into a letterbox. We have to make sure that we speak to everybody who is potentially affected. That's really important. And secondly, I mean, in terms of the penalty aspect, I mean, there is room to consider, maybe as Dion and Yanni have mentioned, that when we let contracts around works, that when we look at things like penalty clauses, this could be part of a penalty clause. So there's an agreement, this is how long the project's going to take. The businesses that are affected understand how long it's going to take and are okay with that. But if it goes beyond that, there needs to be some kind of penalty. So we have penalties for contracts overrunning, and perhaps compensation could be part of the penalty clauses around contracts. So that's something that I think is worth looking at.
Yeah. Tim.
Like the feedback, and Ref's absolutely right, and so is Jamie. You can't throw money at something and solve it, because I think there are some issues with some of our streets with regards to finding surprises when you lift up the road, and some of our streets are like old houses. When you kind of buy an old house and you do it up, you never pull down a wall and say, oh, surprise, it's better than I thought. It just doesn't happen. So, but I will mention a staff member in my area and some others. Ross Herritt was absolutely outstanding, and I've had fantastic feedback, because it does come down to communication. And the key to the communication is when things have gone wrong or when things have been discovered that weren't there, like tram tracks. You would think that we would know where all the old tram tracks are, but surprised we don't. That communication, and I have to say that the staff member, Ross Herritt, has been absolutely outstanding in that area. So I think if we can find a mentor or someone that can guide that, which we have at our hands, that would be the way to go forward. Penalties can only work when there has been a delay that should not have been. To put unfair timelines on something, then there's been a surprise, it just doesn't work. So, thank you.
Vicky.
I wonder if we could just, as a very simple mechanism, do the communication. Do you recall we looked at changing the tone of our communication so that we weren't bossy, and we were actually telling people why we were doing something? So, for example, Rickerton Road, which has been dug up for, I don't know which year we started. 1872. Well, it feels like a very long time, has very long potential areas that we could put a sign that says we're digging up the road because the water pipes underneath are 98 years old and really in danger of collapsing, and we really want you to have a really good water supply and wastewater and sewage. But we haven't told people that along the way, so a lot of people just get frustrated. And I wonder just where we are actually in front of people's businesses, houses, particularly on very busy roads, if we could just tell them for a start why we're doing it, because there are very good reasons why we're doing it, but we tend to keep them slightly secret, and I wonder if we just couldn't get, I'm sure some people have got some old election posters. Oh, you've got some current ones. There'll be a lot more around after the 23rd.
Rev's got all the solutions. Yeah. Look, I just want to kind of wrap up the debate. Oh, Mike.
Sorry. Look, I guess after so many years, we're all now suffering a lot of rebuild fatigue. And it's very clear, obviously, that although we're running the city, there's obviously other agencies involved, and Takaro is obviously leading the repair of Manchester Street and Cambridge Terrace, which has actually caused a lot of that frustration within Christchurch. And I think everyone probably around this council chamber has been absolutely frustrated with what we've been through and what the city's been through. But in terms of some of the actual projects that we've been delivering, especially around my ward with the cycleway, the council staff have gone to great efforts to actually work with the businesses affected. And I know everyone is not happy, but they did do a lot of work and they tried to provide parking wherever possible. And I think really we, the people of Christchurch, just need to have a look at these businesses that are being affected, and perhaps if you need to park 20 metres away from it to go to it, still park there and walk. You know, I think this is a problem we've got to in society, where we just become lazy, and if we can't park outside a business, we just won't go to it. Well, these businesses need our support. So therefore, if you've used them in the past, keep using them. Just park and walk to the business.
Yeah, well, I'll wrap up the debate now. And I just wanted to say that, I mean, it was interesting when this came to finance and performance, it wasn't a unanimous vote. But what we did around the table was, I think, work with staff to come up with some recommendations that we could bring to council. It became very clear during the discussion that the solution to the big problem is in procurement policy, and that's still coming back to council. And within that, I mean, Dion has raised the issue of the rental mechanism, which is how it's done in the UK and some big projects, and you know, I think that all of these options are worthy to explore in that context. So it's kind of like this really focuses on the communication, but also lifts the ongoing question of disruption in the public realm into a governance monitoring role in a much clearer way than it was before. So it's been a really good outcome that this was brought to the table, that we've kind of worked through the issues, and today I think we can agree to a pathway forward, and it will take our city forward. So thanks to those that originally raised it. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank